Why was the United States initially reluctant to assist in rescuing the ancient Egyptian monuments from the rising waters of the Aswan Dam reservoir? And what role did Jackie Kennedy and Richard Goodwin play in rescuing these Egyptian monuments in ancient Nubia, which is today's Southern Egypt and Sudan? And why is there an ancient Egyptian temple housed in a special wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City? Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare, which includes illustrations. Our sister blog includes footnotes, and both include our Amazon book links. In the 13th century BC, Pharaoh Ramses II, who scholars speculate may have been the pharaoh who parleyed with Moses in Exodus, built massive monuments and temples on the banks of the Nile River in Nubia, or today's Sudan and southern Egypt, to impress the locals with Egyptian power and might. And the great temple was dedicated to Ramses himself, and the small temple was dedicated to his wife Nefatari, and there were numerous smaller temples. Over time, Egyptian power waxed and waned, and the desert sands slowly buried many of these monuments after they were abandoned. By the time of the 6th century, the sand buried the massive statues of the great temple up to their knees. They were nearly completely buried when rediscovered by the Europeans in the 1800s. Explorers had to dig through the deep sand dunes to enter the temple. Now, what was the history behind the building of the Aswan Dam that threatened these ancient Egyptian monuments? In the 1952 Egyptian Revolution, the Egyptian Free Officers movement, led by Gamal, Abdel, Nasser, and Mohamed Naguib, overthrew the King Farouk in a coup d'etat, ending the British occupation of Egypt. Under a new constitution of 1956, Nasser became president of Egypt with near dictatorial powers. Nasser, seeking to upgrade the Egyptian military, sought arms from both Russia and America. Since Israel was also a client state of America, she would only supply arms for defensive purposes, and the Egyptian government thought that too many strings were attached to the prospective arms purchases. Also, Egypt was ideologically closer to Russia, so Nasser decided to purchase Russian arms instead. Now, the new Egyptian regime also built the Aswan Dam in southern Egypt with Russian assistance from 1960 to 1970. Historically, the annual flooding of the Nile River enriched the soil of the floodplains and delta of the Nile River, making the Nile Valley ideal for farming. However, low water years meant drought and starvation, while high water years often destroyed the whole crop. The Aswan Dam regulated the flow of water in the Nile and generated electricity for the growing population of modern Egypt. There was an international campaign to save the monuments of Nubia from the flooding of the Aswan Dam reservoir. This campaign was led by UNESCO of the United Nations, which stands for United Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, from 1960 to 1980. And the dam would flood close to 300 miles south of the dam and would flood 22 critical historical sites. Goodwin remembers, from the start, the entire project was entangled in Cold War politics. Angered at the Soviet Union's participation in the Aswan Dam project, the Eisenhower administration had refused to join a UNESCO international campaign to preserve the colossal temple complex at Abu Simbel, along with dozens of smaller temples and statues. Without American leadership, combined with private philanthropy, it seemed likely that these monuments were to be forever lost beneath the leak formed by the rising waters behind the dam. In 1962, Jackie Kennedy sent an urgent memo to her husband, the president, laying out the case for saving Abu Simbel. It is a major temple of the Nile in the 13th century BC. It would like be letting the Parthenon to be flooded. Kennedy referred this project to his speechwriter and assistant, Richard Goodwin, who was also a friend and confidant of Jackie Kennedy, for prompt action. The challenge was convincing Brooklyn Congressman John Rooney that the tens of millions of dollars needed would be a good expenditure. Kennedy predicted that he would reason that these were rocks in the middle of the Egyptian desert, and there's not one Egyptian voter in the entire country. Jackie and Dick persuaded the government to engage in a quid pro quo swap, where the countries of the major contributors would be promised statues, vases, artifacts, and even small temples, based on the size of their contribution. Dick assembled a presentation book with photographs of both the endangered monuments and the temples available for contributors. The pitch-dick plan to convince the congressman to pass the funding was that Napoleon only brought an obelisk back to Paris. We can bring back an entire temple to Washington. Also, Jackie was lobbying wealthy private philanthropists to donate money to the project. Preserving the temple complex of Abu Simbel proved more complicated and expensive than originally conceived. The massive figures and temples had to be cut into pieces and reassembled at a higher elevation. The process had not yet begun by the time Kennedy died. It was left to President Johnson to secure the necessary additional funds. And museums in the United States, France, Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands were gifted minor ancient Egyptian temples in exchange for their assistance in saving these monuments. Since the Abu Simbel temple was on the banks of the Nile, it is built into a small pool in the Metropolitan Museum. This picture shows me with my then teenage daughter, Laura, when we explored the museum and temple while visiting New York City. Goodwin recalls, once the money had been appropriated, Jackie and Dick were able to select a temple commensurate to the public and private money they had amassed. They consulted a group of Egyptologists and narrowed the choices. In the end, both wanted the Temple of Dendur, built to honor the Egyptian goddess Isis by the Roman governor of Egypt, Augustus Caesar, around 15 BC. With a walkway that led to the banks of the Nile, this temple seemed perfectly suited to the banks of the Potomac, alongside the cherry blossoms of Washington, D.C. Goodwin continues, instead of being reassembled on the banks of the Potomac as a memorial tribute to John Kennedy, as Jackie would have preferred, the temple was instead encased in a specially constructed glass wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. In a controlled atmosphere to prevent erosion, a sandstone pylon opens onto a small courtyard where, after unimaginable travels of 6,000 miles and nearly 2,000 years, rises the exquisite Nubian Temple of Dendur. It cost nearly $10 million to move the Temple of Dendur to New York City. And what a moving bill that was. And we have more pictures of the Abu Simbel temple showing its scale. The picture shows that this temple was submerged for part of the year after the first Aswan Dam was built around 1900. And we have an Egyptian alligator guarding the temple. There are other artifacts in the Egyptian section. The sitting statue was in one of the main lobbies in the Metropolitan Museum. And there's a statue of the major Egyptian bird god, Horus. He was the god of kingship, healing, protection, the sun, and the sky. The model boat was likely placed in a royal Egyptian tomb. These figurines would revive in the afterlife to serve the pharaoh. In Egyptian mythology, a sphinx usually depicts a pharaoh, emphasizing his strength and ferocity. Now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. In an unfinished love story, Doris Kearns Goodwin remembers the role her late husband Richard Goodwin and Jackie Kennedy played in facilitating the American efforts to save the ancient Nubian monuments from the rising waters of the Aswan Dam reservoir. And we discuss this source in greater depth in our reflections on John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. The Wikipedia article on the international campaign to save the monuments of Nubia includes links to the original UNESCO magazine's articles detailing this amazing rescue effort. Several of these UNESCO photos were used in this reflection. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.